Yeah, that works. Yep. That's me. I'm Supreme. I don't have much to say about myself. If you're curious about me, you know how to find me.
Well, where do people find you?
You can find me at twitch.tv/Wicked Supreme or on Twitter/Wicked Supreme or whatever the user is, or on YouTube as well. It's all the same.
Gotcha. So, couple 7 questions for you.
Shoot.
The first question I had is, where did you come up with the name Wicked Supreme?
I was looking for a name change or rebranding because my branding on YouTube, or I'm sorry, on Twitch was like fighting game themed for a little while. I used to try to run a channel called The Battle Lounge, and I did like a podcast series, and it was like competitive fighting game stuff, Street Fighter, Tekken, that sort of thing. But then I wanted to make my channel more about like, me personally and, being like an individual streamer, that sort of thing. And I went by Supreme, just the name Supreme, but it was taken on Twitch. It was October. It was near Halloween. I just thought it would be a fun like Halloween name change, and it's stuck ever since.
How long ago was that?
Last Halloween. So the Halloween before this previous one, 2020.
Gotcha. How long have you been streaming to Twitch?
2017 or 2018 or something like that, I want to say.
How'd you get into it?
Competitive fighting games.
You any good at them?
You want to find out?
I mean, kinda.
Sure.
I mean, kinda. Tekken's one of my favorites, and so is Soul Calibur. I've been a big fan of Soul Calibur for years, but yeah, the reason that I came across you at all, you're not nearly in the politics sphere as much as many of these different streamers are, surprisingly. The reason that I actually came across your channel was back during the Dylan Burns fiasco. I really hadn't heard of you very much. I was with Politically Provoked at the time, and I had seen the coverage, and I thought that you had some really, really, really good takes on that, like surprisingly good. So I kind of watched a lot of that coverage from your channel. How did you stumble across that whole fiasco? Did it blow up beforehand, or did you kind of have knowledge coming into it?
Dylan and I are really close. We like to joke that he's my nephew. When Dylan first came to Twitch, he was interacting with one of my best friends, A4 Andre, is another Twitch streamer whom I had been doing content with for a couple of years at that point. And, Dylan and I are close. And so when he came out with that stream, I reviewed it, and I have experience with information gathering and intelligence reporting and that sort of thing, basically information assurance and, confirming evidence and that sort of thing. I have, no real legal expertise whatsoever, but I saw what he had presented, and it, it looked just absolutely wrong to me. That's really all there is to it. So I took Dylan aside and, really tried to help him understand that what he had done was, really wrong, and that the level of evidence that I think most people think is required to make those sorts of accusations is the bar is much higher and ought to be much higher than a lot of people think, especially after years of there being a trend of like cancellations based on very poorly verified evidence or screenshots, things of that nature, or even the level of evidence that ought to be required to make like an indictment on a person's character.
Well, now this fiasco kind of jumped off without warning. Nobody was really prepared for it. I guess there were some insiders who kind of knew something maybe was coming down the pipeline. A lot of people, I think, kind of noticed it because Destiny, of course, got involved and kind of pulled this guy's ass out of the fire. But it appeared to me at first, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the mob was coming for Dylan, or for Prime case. I mean, in a big way, they were coming, and they were hitting him pretty hard.
Yep, I think so as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of the trend, right? Is that part of what makes these events really, really popular is, we've been hammering this home. I don't know if you ever watch a guy named Chud Logic. He's one of my favorite streamers. He's a friend of mine. He hits this Huxley quote, that I like to quote all the time too, about like righteous indignation and the most delicious of moral treats, when you can make it out that your bad behavior is actually a moral good and morally righteous. I think people really enjoy having a pogrom over somebody's character, or being able to like hang somebody's character as an effigy and beat it with sticks and say this person is bad, this person is wrong. We get to feel justified in our hatred and our condemnation of this individual based on their actions, that sort of thing. So it doesn't take much, and people will they'll engage in motivated reasoning to try to establish that, defaming a person is justified, even if the evidence isn't really there to substantiate it. And I think this was just another example of that.
Did it surprise you how quickly the mob turned against Prime?
No. And initially, I was supportive of Dylan when he was doing that stream. I was supportive of Dylan based on, the first evidence that I saw that Dylan would be presented was he had tweeted it out before he did his stream. It was presented by a guy named Rage Pope. It's another friend of mine on the platform. And, Rage Pope was going over the DMs and stuff that would have been presented on Dylan's channel later. And at the time I was like, yeah, sure, this stuff doesn't look flattering for Prime, but like this isn't indicative of anything, like unless we see some of those logs of him saying this, that, or the other that's being alleged. And we never saw that, we never saw those logs. But, at first I was supportive of Katarana just because, like, that's, the thing you're supposed to do is, like, allow somebody to speak out and like, tell their side of the story. But once the story had been told, it seemed really clear to me that, like, you guys don't have what you need to make this condemnation, and it's coming at the expense of Prime. So I didn't have any insider information. I think you touched on that earlier. I know Destiny had kind of been brought into it a little bit early, and like he was part of some communities and some private chats where he got to sort of see the winds blowing this way. I didn't know about it. I didn't know anything about it until the day that it had been presented. So it was my just sort of like everything, all of my interactions during that were just my knee-jerk reaction to everything, to answer that question.
That's kind of interesting. I was curious about that because you seem like you were very well informed on it as that coverage went, and that coverage went for a long time. I mean, that was a fiasco that took days to finally get sorted out. My understanding was that what is her name, Katarana or Katarana? Katarana, sorry. That she was one of the most sub to Twitch platforms after that whole fiasco had happened.
Wait, I'm sorry. What is it? That she was one of the most subscribed to channels?
When I was investigating, that somebody had said, now this was just a Reddit thread, so I don't know how accurate it is, of course.
I don't think there's any truth to that.
Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to go over it. So you enter into the fray. You had a lot of people watching you that night, right? You're kind of going back and forth on this. Did you have any communication with Destiny that night?
Nope.
No? Just all you. Yeah, I basically stuck to your channel because I thought this was pretty good. So this bombshell hits that he's dating this gal. Dylan is. Did that shock you?
No, it didn't shock me. If you go back and look through the footage and the logs and stuff, I remember when Destiny first called into Dylan, I was only half paying attention and I didn't watch the entire stream. I basically just watched until he presented the evidence, and then I spoke to Dylan privately after. I didn't watch much of that stream. And when Destiny first called in, I didn't realize it was Destiny because he was on vacation. He was on his phone. You know what I mean? It's not the same microphone. He sounded different. And I just remember thinking like, wow, this person's being like really aggressive. And I thought it was just some like random incel dude that Dylan was sort of just entertaining or something like that. And I was in destiny.gg and like the whole thing about the wake up calls. I remember Destiny kind of drilling hard on like the wake up calls must have been indicative of like a definite romantic relationship, or at the very least it was, it would be reasonable to infer that there must have been some romantic relationship because of there being wake up calls. I understood that situation a little differently from him. But that's about as much as I heard of that conversation. Once I understood it was Destiny, I was like, okay, like I understand that this situation is in pretty good hands. Like I think Destiny's ability to process information critically, and his like the way that he deals with like sexual harassment and like sexual dynamics between men and women socially is like really mature and responsible, among probably the best on the platform. I stopped listening to that conversation at that point. I started listening to it after the fact.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So you go into the conversation, you kind of hear everything that's going on. You stop listening to it. When you got involved after the mob had turned, after that bombshell had dropped, that's when I really saw kind of the mob turn back against Dylan, right? At first they seemed to really be coming for K's, and then when that bombshell dropped that he was dating this gal, that seemed to really 180 the entire situation. Is that accurate? Or I
wouldn't put it that way. I don't think the fact that Dylan and Kat had been dating or romantically involved in any way had any bearing on whether or not Prime had sexually harassed Kat. I don't think that's really that relevant, personally. To me, everything comes down to the evidence, okay? So you would say that there's like potentially a conflict of interest there. I would say that that's something to investigate, but you would need like a smoking gun to make the case that there was some sort of conspiracy, that like their relationship, that they had plotted to try to defame Prime to like ruin his show or something like that. I don't think there's like, there were a lot of crazy ideas, you know, floating around at that time. The idea that Dylan just wanted to sink Prime's ship to take his viewership. I don't think there's any truth to that, or, you know, at the very least that hasn't been well substantiated. And Dylan affirms that that's not the case.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, but you can understand from the layman why they might perceive that was going on. It's a kind of an odd thing to just so happen to be dating the romantic interest of your competitor, right? Suspicion
is warranted, but I think there's a not a fine line. I think there's a pretty thick line between suspicion and substantiation, and I think people, the layman, as you put it, like to sort of dance that line pretty liberally, pretty carelessly. I think this.
No, well, go ahead. I tend to agree with you. I mean, I tend to agree that you should always go where the evidence tells you that you should go. I didn't find it to be a huge stretch for why an individual person who was watching this, because it exploded kind of overnight. You know what I mean? And watching your coverage of it was especially interesting. I don't know if you even still have those VODs up, and I can direct people to them, but it was very good coverage. In any case, from the what you would call the layman's point of view, if they were watching that live and then they heard that hit, and then they found out that they both ran debate shows, and maybe they weren't direct competitors, but it happened to be that Case had a romantic interest in this person, and Dylan happened to be dating her, and I don't think that Case knew that was going on. You could see why people would like really flock to that idea, you know?
The suspicion is reasonable. Yeah, sure. I wouldn't contend that.
Okay. Gotcha. I was just, like I said, this was the only reason I bring this up. I know this kind of buried history is because that was my introduction to your show. And I thought that your takes on that particular situation were pretty good. And then I'll just finish it up with this. So all of that ends up, kind of just going by the wayside. It looks like they kind of both forgave each other and, and moved on and this kind of thing. Do you still have a good relationship with both of them post?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. I could, if I were Case, maybe I would hold on to some, some grudges a little bit. That was pretty brutal for the guy, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well. And he was perfectly reasonable in being, sort of outraged. And I think, so that apology that happened was the result of like a late night 4-hour conversation that basically I mediated between the two of them. And, we recorded the whole thing. Prime basically, I tried to get Dylan to understand like how he had wronged Prime. We tried to clear up any, discrepancies in information or both sides of the story, any sort of discrepancies from each individual's side of the story. And then, Prime had like a list of demands, to set things right. And Dylan met them all. And, the rest is history. But yeah, to this day, I think they don't, Dylan maintains that he like overheard something that was like really, really over the line. And what I've tried to help Dylan understand is that like, even if you heard something that was over the line, not trying to like assassinate somebody's character and lambast them and indict them in front of like a public crowd without the evidence to substantiate that you really did hear that is not reasonable. It's not justified to ask everybody to just take you at your word that this thing happened if it's something egregious to that nature. And even if it was egregious to that nature, like a first offense does not warrant a public pogrom. It's like, he asked me how this would be handled in the professional world. He was really convinced that in the professional world, if he had overheard in like an office environment, what he overheard, in a voice call between Kat and Prime, that a person would be fired outright, and that's not true. It's not the case. Like in the professional world, in an instance of like perceived sexual harassment, like HR is going to get involved. They're going to try to collect everybody's side of the story. They're going to try to resolve the conflict at the lowest possible level. And, they're going to try to find a solution that works for all the parties involved. They're going to collect a paper trail, which is the most important thing. And then, if it happens more times, then there will be a paper trail of multiple offenses. And then you know what I mean? Like there will be stronger grounds to fire somebody if there's like a record of repeat offenses or, potential prosecution if somebody wants to take that person to court, something like that. But the idea that if one person slips up, that their life is canceled forever, their career is over, that sort of thing. True for entertainers because everything we do is in the public eye. And it really depends on how public these things are. And it's a matter of like how much the public rejects an individual's actions. Because as entertainers, like your ability to collect sponsors or want sponsors to have you represent them, or for platforms to want you to represent them, is contingent on how popular you are and how much people accept you and your actions. But in an office environment, that's not the case. And I would say if you can handle things in private, which Dylan had an opportunity to, and he rejected, then you should, especially if it's the first time you've ever heard of an instance or an interaction, as such as like sexual harassment, things of that nature.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think that any of the post-event Twitch protocols that different creators try to put in place really gained any steam, though. And I still feel like it's just a matter of time before something like this happens again. Would you agree with that assessment? I
don't know what tools Twitch actually has, because I don't think anybody tried to get Twitch involved. It may be
not Twitch itself. It would be the creators. A lot of the different Twitch creators, especially on the left, came together post that event and tried to make various channels that people could go through before things like that became public. Mm-hmm. And they seem to have largely fallen apart very quickly. They didn't really seem to gain any steam. It's probably one of those situations where you have too many cooks in the kitchen. You know what I mean?
I'd say it's a matter of liability and authority. Like, what authority? So I toyed with this idea as well. There were a couple of creators that I had in mind that I just wanted to advertise as people that I want people to feel safe going to evaluate and help collect evidence over any presence of, perceived or persisting sexual harassment, things of that nature, and that we could like do things in private. But ultimately that fell apart as well. I mean, it was really not really more than just a half-baked idea that I entertained for like a day or two until I realized that the problem with this, with streamers having some sort of like infrastructure for like reporting sexual harassment or things of that nature, is it's a matter of liability and it's a matter of authority, right? Authority being like a justified use of power or like credibility that like everybody agrees is the case, and that falls apart instantly, especially when you have like political streamers. There's like a team sports mentality where people will just reject anything that a given streamer says if they have a personal feud with another streamer, or if there's like personal ideology involved, or if that's a big part of a streamer's content and you just disagree with one of the values or something like that a streamer has.
Well, and there's also quiet players who aren't streamers but do have a large influence on Twitch streamers. Sometimes they're organizers, but they're background people. Sometimes they are just editors, things like this, but they seem to be fairly well connected within these communities. Oftentimes streamers seem to use them for redress or for these back channels. It seems like sometimes there's power players in the background that you don't see.
I guess I'm curious, what do you mean? Like, what's the significance of this?
Well, because I often wondered in the Burns fiasco, how many players were involved that weren't actually public faces.
Sure. So I think you're talking about Kurt.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I think you're talking about Kurt, right?
That would be one. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's others who are involved who are more background rather than they are mainstream streamers as well. And I often wondered how many of them were involved or had this type of information beforehand. Mm-hmm. And then, it kind of falls on them as well to bear the burden of that responsibility, in my opinion.
So in this interaction, I know that there were a couple people that were in the background at first that then made public statements and stuff. There's the Samantha Banana person or whatever. and a big part of why this blew up the way that it did was based on their sort of like bearing false witness, if you will. Whether Samantha, whether she believed that she was, you know what I mean, saying things that weren't true or not, like, you know, it could be the case that she just convinced herself that she had seen certain things, and then later it was a big whoopsie. I guess, you know, the problem is that, like, none of the people that were involved in this, aside from, you know, in this case, you know, excusing Prime because he was just like the subject of all this, none of the people that were involved in presenting this information or collecting the information, none of the people that were involved in prosecuting Prime in front of the public square knew what the hell they were doing, or like understood how to approach a situation like this. They were just mimicking what they had seen in the public square on Twitter Spaces from the Me Too movement, things of that nature. Like, you know, this was just a case that all of the people that were involved in like prosecuting Prime's character, you know, in a public setting, were just mimicking imperfect systems that they had witnessed that they wanted to participate in.
Yeah, I tend to agree that that's probably true. In the end, it looked like, you know, pretty much it was a massive fiasco, but essentially nobody really had any damage to themselves or their career or anything else because of it. Do you ever wonder in retrospect if that's a good thing or a bad thing? That maybe there should have been, you know, more of an outcry for, you know, for how this thing went down?
Oh, I think to this day, Dylan, I think a lot of people lost faith in Dylan from that. I think Dylan, you know, lost a lot of credibility in a lot of people's eyes. And to this day, people hold him to account over the Prime thing. And, I am, you know, I'm made to understand that it's true for Prime as well, that as soon as some people saw those messages, that it was unforgivable to some amount of people. And, you know, that people, no matter how unjustified that was to Prime, will just not forgive him for like the content of one or two messages or something like that in his private message chain or something. So I wouldn't say that nobody felt any consequences. I guess I'm curious what you mean. Like, what is it the case that there's like a certain extent of consequences that you think should have been met that were not met? Or,
well, if you're asking me directly, mm-hmm. Then I'll answer directly. I do. Mm-hmm. I think that you know, from my perspective, it looked like there was a kind of a conspiracy of people who were kind of behind this, who just walked away from it, and once the public lost interest, there, you know, no consequences were meted out. And that's not something that typically moral men like myself anyway, mm-hmm. That we care for, right? We tend to like to see some type of consequence get laid down for people who do horrific things.
Can you name names and like discuss the extent of?
So I mean, like, one name you've already brought up was Samantha mm-hmm. Banana, right? Mm-hmm. This is somebody who was in the background. However, I talked to Sam about this just out of direct curiosity, and you know, of course, Samantha's story is very different. I don't know really that you know, after the few days that this went on, that anybody really pursued any type of investigation into it any further. And I just often wonder, having been in the Twitch arena now, I haven't been in as long as many people, but I definitely have connections with some of the background players. And they all seem to also think that, you know, people kind of got off a little bit easy on this one. You know what I mean? Kind of got off just a little bit easy on it.
I feel that way about Samantha as well, personally. I feel like, you know, a big part of the reason that all this blew up the way that it did, and even the reason that Dylan believed that Prime's actions had been worse than they really were based on basically her treachery. You know, like her playing both sides, trying to get Prime to say certain things and then misquoting them, playing telephone to try to, you know, interpret them in the most uncharitable light to Dylan to make him believe things that Prime had not actually said. I tend to agree that I think Samantha was a pretty big catalyst in this ending up as horrible as it did. And she had like an apology on Twitter, but then like she wouldn't really take any accountability after that. She's like, I already apologized, you know? And Dylan, I think, was reasonably very upset with Samantha and was like, you told me he had like, there were 12 or 14 women that he had been abusing that you said you knew would come forward and like, you know, whatever. And then when push came to shove, you said, whoops, I was just kidding. Or I don't know what I was thinking when I said that. Like, come on, there's got to be more than like a Twitter apology there. And her reason for not like accepting that when Dylan asked her, like, what the fuck? Like, you need to help like make this right on my behalf. She said, well, you're demanding it. You're demanding I apologize, something like that. I already apologized on Twitter. That left a sour taste in my mouth. But at the end of the day, this was between Prime and Dylan, and they were able to work things out. You know what I mean? Like, once Prime had a... Oh, go ahead.
I think that the upfront, what I mean by upfront is the faces that you see, I tend to agree, that the faces that you see who are the personalities that people follow, they work things out, everything's fine, they can all move on with a handshake. Mm-hmm. However, the movers and shakers on the back end that the people don't see, that's far more concerning to me because they have agendas that aren't up for public scrutiny. Nobody even knows who they are. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people even realize how many of them there are in the background mm-hmm. who move these types of things forward.
Well, if you want accountability for those people, now's the time to start naming them and discuss the extent to which you think they were involved in this interaction. Because, listen, I like transparency. And I like giving the public all the information that's required to understand a given issue. You know, it sounds like you have some insight into people who were involved that you don't think faced any accountability for how they may have exacerbated this issue. I'm with you. Now's the time.
Well, I think it would be irresponsible of me to produce anything unless I had something very substantive for you. I just began to really look into this.
Sure.
And so I can tell you right now, though, what I do know about the Twitch hierarchy and the inner workings of it mm-hmm. is that often what you see in the public sphere, the faces that you see in public, they have many, many different people backing them that you don't see. And those people often work between several different content creators in order to streamline different things. And I would not be surprised if many of those people were involved in this.
Okay.
They call them drama merchants, right?
If you were looking for the way to trigger me, like the hardest, you found it. Because I would argue that it's equally irresponsible to like advertise to people, haha, there's people in the background and there's conspiracy afoot, but I can't tell you what it is.
Well, I'm not advertising that, sir. I'm just saying that mm-hmm. from my perspective, I know that how the Twitch hierarchy works pretty well, and that there's insiders behind most creators. And this is all that I'm talking about, mm-hmm. is that it's not a large stretch of the imagination to think that, considering how many people had access to this information before it even became public, that some of those people were involved in that. That's all. I'm not making any accusations mm-hmm. or anything of the sort.
Not specific, but you are alluding to the presence of there being some, conspiracy that multiple people were involved with. And listen, you
already named one conspirator. Actually, you named two conspirators. And the thing is that there's probably multiple conspirators who were involved in this type of fiasco.
This language, you brought me on to discuss this because you said that my coverage of it you thought was good. I think it was as well. I think the bar that I hold for verifying information and reporting information only which you can substantiate is the standard, or ought to be the standard. And right now you're not meeting that standard, right?
Okay, so what about suspicion though? Shouldn't suspicion be followed up on?
So you're using terms like it's not a large stretch of the imagination, but it is a stretch of the imagination still, right? You are taking an analytical leap, right? And advertising that in a way
that I am, sir.
Well, you are. You are taking an analytical leap. You're saying it's not a large stretch of the imagination. So it is a stretch of the imagination, right? Whether or not you would classify it as big or small.
Well, that was just a term of phrase. It didn't mean anything, and I think that you're maybe hyper focusing on something that wasn't said. So let me be more crystal clear with my language then. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that for everybody watching this program, mm-hmm. there are movers and shakers involved in Twitch.
Who are they?
Who they are is irrelevant.
Do you have anything to show us to substantiate that there are movers?
I can show you, of course I can. But
so can we talk about it?
That aside,
mm-hmm.
there are movers and shakers who are involved in Twitch who are not the people that you see on the screen. Now, why anybody would deny that would be foolish to deny, right? And it would be foolish to think for a second that I couldn't provide evidence that there's movers and shakers in the background. Come on, man.
Well, let's talk about it. If you're...
mm-hmm. there's all kinds of small content creators who are movers and shakers in the background, or non-content creators who are still well trusted between these different communities. I'm just saying to you that as I've been looking into this and you follow this thread, you start to find out there was more people maybe involved in this than people think. That's all.
Sure. Well, let's talk about those people and the evidence that you have to provide that they were a part of this or that they were part of some conspiracy.
Let's start. Okay. I mean, if you want to press it that way, I didn't know that this was the way the conversation is going to go, but let's get into it. So first and foremost, Dylan Burns has presented himself for an awful long time as being a homosexual, and then bam, bombshell hits, and we find out that he's dating this gal who happens to be the person who is dating his direct competitor. Now, I know that from your perspective, you say, sure, this sounds just mildly suspicious. However, there's no evidence to confirm it. But what type of evidence was presented to the public? Not that much. There's an awful lot of things that went on in the background, including with people like Samantha Banana, who you named, including like this other gentleman that you named. We don't really have all of the pieces to this day. That's all I'm saying. And if there was two movers and shakers in the background, Samantha Banana being a producer, for instance, and goes between many, many different creators, there's other people who are producers in the background. It would not surprise me if many of them had more information on this.
So you said it would not surprise me, but there's like a sort of tacit implication there that there exists the presence of other producers that are trying to weave together some conspiracy to take down Prime. There's there's a term that I've been made aware of recently that I really like. It's called speaking out of both sides of your mouth. Are you aware of this term?
Yeah.
So I like the term. It wouldn't surprise me, but there's a suggestion there. You're trying to persuade people.
Suggesting.
You're persuading people.
Heavily suggesting that there was a lot of people who were involved in the background who are not just a variety of producers, but they were Twitch movers and shakers who had a vested interest in seeing this thing shake out. I am suggesting that strongly. Now, whether or not I can prove that is a different detail, and I can't, and I'm not saying that I can. But what I am saying is that I think that there are threads here that deserve to be followed, considering the amount of misinformation that was out there. That's my take on it.
Okay. Do you know who Christopher Hitchens is?
Yeah.
Okay. He has a really great quote. You may have heard it. It says, "That which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence."
Yeah, but I have evidence.
Okay. Can we go over it?
Yeah, we just went over some of it. We've already discussed that there was people working in the background, like Samantha Banana, for instance, right? So that is evidence that people were working in the background.
So I think you and I might have a different interpretation of the word evidence.
I don't think that we would. You would agree that she was working in the background, right?
Well, the problem is that in this moment, I would have qualms. Like, at this point, that's a matter of record. Like, Samantha's involvement is a matter of record. Her tweets are public and the footage is public, right? Like, that footage is saved. But right now, you're positing the presence of other people with which, that as of yet you haven't named, and like some evidence that those people exist.
I see. So from your perspective, I walk in a room and I find a dead body, and because I don't know who shot them, that means that I can't say that I assume that people did.
Well, in this case, you're saying that the person was shot, but we have no evidence of a gunshot. There's no bullet wound. There's not a bullet.
We do have significant evidence that there was a gunshot, yeah. So the significant evidence that we have has already been publicly gone through and demonstrated. And as we know right now, there are still people who have low trust or low faith in both Burns and K's. And the reason for this is because I don't think that the real story on this thing ever really got out there. I think that Destiny pulled out what he could at the time, and then the public forgot about it. But I do think that it's worth really diving into. And as I get to meet more of the background players in Twitch, oftentimes when I discuss these various things with them, I'm surprised to note that they often agree that there is more going on in the background than people know.
You are making what are called logical inferences, right? Based on suspicions you have, and you're taking analytic leaps. And the problem is that you're taking analytic leaps and then asking me to believe that these analytic leaps are evidence, are credible evidence, substantial evidence of like something occurring that may not actually have occurred.
Folded hands, medium, light skin
tone. Give me just a second. So in this instance, if I were to do something similar, I would say you've invited me onto this podcast or this show that you have, right? And it seems strange to me that you don't have a very good relationship with Dylan Burns, right? And I don't think it's a large stretch of the imagination to think that you trying to resurrect this old drama and like use my information processing, maybe history or capabilities or whatever, to try to posit that Dylan Burns must have been part of a grander conspiracy that, I don't think it's a large stretch of the imagination. I'm actually quite suspicious that you're trying to take down Dylan Burns and try to assassinate his reputation further by positing some grand conspiracy on his part. And I would say, maybe it's kind of reasonable to suspect that actually this is a conspiracy on your part to try to defame Dylan Burns even more, even though the situation was already resolved. Would you say that I have credible evidence for this?
No, I wouldn't say that you have credible evidence for it.
But this is perfectly analogous to what you've posited today.
No, it's not perfectly analogous. It was just a diatribe. It has nothing to do with what I'm saying at all.
Yeah, I would say what you engaged in was a diatribe.
I had wanted to interview you and thank you pretty heavily for your coverage of this. I didn't even know it would go down this road. I had no way to predetermine how the conversation would go. Clearly,
sure.
You and I can agree that that's true.
I have no reason to believe that that's true, though, right?
Well, you do, because how would I ever know?
Well, how would I ever know?
Well, right. So that's how we can both know it's true.
No.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Hold on. What you're positing to me is like that uncertainty is certainty.
No, yeah. If I can't know how a conversation's going to go and you can't know how a conversation was going to go, then how the fuck could we ever have come in here with predetermined conversational goals, sir?
So to be clear, I can't know that you didn't know how the conversation would go. I can't know that.
Then why did you just agree that I wouldn't?
Well, you also can't predict that I may not know how the conversation would go.
Just agree that you couldn't.
Agree that I couldn't what?
That you couldn't have known.
What I couldn't have known.
Right. There we go. So
well, I would say that it's impossible to establish. We can't establish whether or not either of us knew how the conversation would go, right?
Because we both agreed it's true. So then it's established.
But I don't know that it's true. You could be lying and I could be lying, right?
Why did you just agree it was true?
Well, hang on. Could I be lying?
Are you saying that you're lying to me?
Could I be lying?
I mean, you could be an elf, I guess. I mean, could doesn't mean anything.
How would you know if I was lying?
Or are you not lying? Because if you're not lying, I'm just taking it at your word that you told me the truth the first time and that you couldn't have known how this conversation was going to go, and neither could I.
If I was lying, how would you know?
Well, there would be no way to determine that.
Okay.
What does that have to do with anything, though? If we're both in agreement of the same thing, which is that we couldn't have known how the conversation was going to go, then that's that. Very
right. But I was positing a theory that there was some conspiracy that you brought me on here to try to like defame Dylan Burns' character or something like that. And that's based on a history of like a soured relationship that you have with Dylan and a series of debates and disagreements that you've had with Dylan. And that I was engaging in the exact same reasoning that you were engaging with to suggest that Dylan was part of some larger conspiracy, to posit that you are part of some larger conspiracy. And if I don't have... Oh, go ahead.
The problem is that that's a red herring and it's not really relevant to what we're talking about. I understand that you want to make some kind of bizarre analogous, comparison there. But if you and I both already agreed we couldn't have known how the conversation was going to go, then it's not really analogous.
Well, hold on. What I'm asking you to agree with is that it's not reasonable to expect that I could know that if you had some plan to engage the conversation in this way, that I could know about it if I did not have evidence to substantiate it.
Then why did you just agree that you couldn't have? That's bizarre.
That's what I'm saying. I cannot know if you had a plan to steer the conversation in this direction. Well, I cannot know that.
I mean, you can't, I guess, know anything, I guess. But what you can know is that I most certainly didn't steer it that way. I just asked.
How can I know that?
Because I asked the questions. And there's like a video that you can go back over to see the questions being asked. Actually, I think you steered it this way, but fair enough. Like we can continue to go with it. I was just saying from my perspective that there are movers and shakers in the background, and it would not surprise me if there was more to this than meets the eye. That's all.
Okay. I want to see some evidence of movers and shakers in the background that substantiates that there was some like greater conspiracy.
And that's completely fair. And you deserve to see evidence for that. And what did I already tell you? I don't have compelling evidence for it. nor did I offer to produce any compelling evidence for you. Just told you that from my standpoint, logically, it would make sense if such were true.
Right. And from my standpoint, logically, it would make sense if you were bringing up this old drama to defame the character of somebody that you have a history of disagreements with, and so on and so forth. The thing is, I would argue that me positing that this is like a real credible, that there's like really strong reasoning to believe that this happened would be irresponsible, right? I think that it would be.
It's not irresponsible.
So I think that it would be for the same reason that. Why? Because I'm persuading a group of people in this moment. There are people watching this conversation, right? And the reason that I would want to bring this up and try to sow like some credible suspicion or something like that is to persuade people to believe that it's likely true. That not only might it be true, but that it's likely true, and to try to motivate people to search for evidence to substantiate that it's true.
Oh, yeah, that's terrible. Motivating people to search for evidence.
I think that's fine. I think an investigation, there are a lot of instances where suspicion is warranted, and an investigation ought to be initiated.
Okay, then. So you don't think that there's any suspicion here that's warranted? That's what you're saying.
So in this case,
even though you just said earlier that there was suspicion that was warranted.
So in this case, I would say in the case of Dylan and Prime, if you wanted to do an investigation, there's a reason why we have to entrust relevant authorities to conduct investigations and not, let like partisan individuals, try to weave narratives, that sort of thing. But in this case, between Dylan and Prime,
that's interesting, considering how many different cases are busted open by individuals who have no authority whatsoever investigating them.
Who, like what?
For instance, this killer who was just brought to justice recently. I watched a Netflix series on it. I believe he was the Golden State Killer, something like that. And that was just a bunch of internet sleuths who spent 20 years hunting it down until they figured out the truth.
And then what did they do with the information?
They didn't have any imbued authority whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Well, even if they turned it over to the authorities, they were the ones who uncovered the information. Yeah.
That's fine. If you wanted to get authorities involved to conduct a proper investigation, I would support that. But in this case, that would be contingent on Prime wanting to like press charges or something like that.
Well, it would be contingent on anybody who was investigating it to find out if there was more than meets the eye, right?
Sure. And if you have something to present that there was more than meets the eye, I would love.
I told you that there was nothing. I was just as a basic curiosity question, explaining that there are movers and shakers in the background, and that. Based on that, I still think that there is something there that's worth looking at, of course.
Sure. So in this case, Dylan and Prime have resolved their differences. Prime had a list of demands. They both discussed both of their sides of the story. They came to an understanding. They came to an agreement, and that agreement was met. Now, I think it's perfectly fair if Prime were to come out and say, you know what, actually, this thing left a bad taste in my mouth, and I want to pursue. There's a couple, loose threads that I would like to see. I feel like maybe it's the case that there are some things that I didn't really get resolved or something like that. I think that would be fair on Prime's part, but I would leave that up to him.
I see. So do you think that Twitch is a community supreme?
Yeah.
So do you think that what affects one person can affect other people?
Potentially. Yep.
Yeah. So it's not a big stretch for somebody who operates within the Twitchosphere, who is a content creator, to understand that if this can happen to this person, it can happen to you too.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, regardless of what the personal feelings of these two individuals would be, it would still be in your own vested interest to make sure that if there were players behind it, that you would uncover who those players were so that it didn't happen to you.
Well, if you ever have evidence of those other players and their involvement, I would love to see it.
Yeah, and if I ever come up with evidence, I'm happy to present it, but I wasn't here to present evidence or not present evidence, but rather just neutrally ask you about the situation. When you pressed on it, I was happy to give you what my opinion was, but I never postulated that I had any evidence to the contrary.
But you did positively assert that, quote unquote, there are these movers and shakers in the background that are moving these things. Mm-hmm.
There are movers and shakers in the background, and you named two of them.
Well, I mean, they weren't really in the background.
There was more than that, too, who were involved in the background.
Okay, so you are positively asserting that there are more people involved that we did not know about originally.
Yeah.
Can you substantiate that?
Yeah.
Okay, can we take a look at it?
No. But when I'm ready to unveil it, then you can take a look at it. And I guess we can come back to the video where you scoff. But I think that all the creators know that that's true. I've talked to many of them.
So if you were to release some evidence to substantiate this later and then come back to this video and highlight the fact that I scoffed, I would make the same argument that it would not be reasonable to ask me to believe a thing if you were not showing me that it's true. I didn't
ask you to believe it. I'm just postulating what I believe.
Okay. What was the point of bringing up the fact that I just scoffed just now?
Well, just because if evidence does come forward, I can...
That I would look foolish for scoffing, right?
I think you would, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Why would I look foolish for doing something that we agreed just now was perfectly reasonable for me to do?
It's perfectly reasonable for you in the moment to scoff and pretend that you don't know that there's more movers and shakers in the background. However, if I present evidence that, let's say, you did know that there was more movers and shakers in the background, then it would look unreasonable.
So now you're positing that not only are there movers and shakers in the background.
I didn't posit it.
Well, hang on.
I just said if.
No, you did posit it, but you're now positing that I know who they are and that I'm lying about it now.
Didn't say any word about it.
You are
putting words in my mouth.
No, you just said if I release footage or evidence in the future that showed that you knew that there were movers and shakers in the background.
Yes, this is all under a hypothetical pretense.
Okay, but you were threatening like this.
I didn't threaten anything.
You
Nor
did.
Did I make a single accusation? We're literally talking in the realm of hypothetical at the moment because you hypothetically postulated this thing.
In this moment, I'm willing to believe that you genuinely do not know like how carelessly you're speaking. In this moment, I'm willing to believe that. So I'm not trying to attack you, or I didn't come here to debate. Honest to God, I did not come here to debate. In this moment, I'm just trying to help you understand which words of you are catching traction where, what I feel the implications are. And it feels like you're making a statement.
What do you mean feel? Do you have evidence for how you feel?
Sure. If we wanted, we could do clips.
What's your evidence for how you feel?
Sure. If you wanted, we could do some clips of you making a statement and then like one or two sentences later saying, I didn't say that.
Go ahead. Do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah,
if you give me some time. So in the space of an interview,
Now you need time.
But yes, it does.
I thought you just said that you could present evidence for how you felt.
Sure. Listen, if I were to present evidence by the end of this interview, like, how would you feel about that?
Present evidence right now.
Okay.
For how you feel.
Well, it's not about how I feel. It's about you making contradicting or conflicting statements.
You just say that you could present evidence for how you feel multiple times.
Well, that's where you set the goalposts. It was a failure to engage in the point that I was attempting to make with you.
But that's what you said. You said that you could present evidence for how you feel multiple times. It's what you said, not me. I didn't say that. Now, if I can present clips to you that you did indeed say that.
Sure. So it is my feeling that you are making statements, and then within a couple of statements later, when I'm trying to draw attention to what it was that you said and what the implications are, you're claiming not to have said that, right? That is my feeling, and I feel reasonably assured that I can substantiate that, like within a pretty reasonable amount of time, like within
reasonable?
Like 5-10 minutes.
Didn't do it.
If that's how you want to spend the time in this interview, I'm perfectly happy to do that. I feel perfectly comfortable doing that.
This is what you wanted to do, so do it.
Okay. If that's what you want to do, yes, we can do that. It's fine.
Good.
Do you want to put my stream up on your screen so we can do this? I'm going to come out and say, you know what? Actually, this thing left a bad taste.
No,
well, my stream is up if you want to watch my. I just mean like on your end. It's in my mouth, and I want to pursue. There's a couple, loose threads that I
we can do that.
would like to see. I feel like maybe this is I think a fine opportunity to demonstrate what this looks like. I suppose maybe it's the case that there are some things that I didn't really get resolved or something like that. I think a fun. Potentially.
To Twitch. Yeah, so we'll see. It's not a big stretch for somebody who. We'll see which of us is right, I suppose. Which is Spear, who is a content creator, to understand that if this can happen to this person, own vested.
Those other players and they're
just neutrally active.
Positively assert that quote unquote there are these movers and shakers in the background that are moving these things. Mm-hmm.
There are.
Okay. So I've said that it seems like you're positively asserting that there are movers and shakers in the background. You've just said that's true. You have agreed. Okay.
But you agreed to that.
Okay. Sure. So just as long as we have it clear now that in the moment you just agreed that you are positively asserting that there are quote unquote movers and shakers in the background.
And so did you, and you named two of them.
Well, I mean, they weren't really in the background.
There was more than that. So if we both assert that something is true, then we're agreeing it's true.
Sure.
In the back. Yeah.
We agree that it's true that you are positing the presence of quote unquote.
No, that's not what we agreed to. We agreed that there's movers and shakers in the background.
Well, hang on. No, let's listen to it again.
Postulated that I had any evidence to the contrary.
But you did positively assert that quote unquote there are these movers and shakers in the background that are moving these things. Mm-hmm.
There are.
So what I said was, but you did positively assert that there are movers and shakers in the background, and you say that's true. Am I agreeing with you that there are movers and shakers in the background?
Yes, because you said that there were as well.
No, I said that you were positively asserting.
What are you talking about, man?
I don't think Samantha Banana was in the background. She made a public statement.
After the fact?
Wait, no, she was on Dylan Burns' initial stream.
It wasn't just Samantha Banana involved in all of that. And as you have already said multiple times, there are people who operate in the background of Twitch. That's all I postulated, period. And you said, yes, you agreed.
Listen, I think if it's the case, like saying, it seems like you're saying there are definitely people in this Dylan Burns situation.
So what do you mean seems like? Just tell me what it is that you think I'm saying, not seems like.
Sure, I will tell you what I think you're saying, and I'm trying to create wiggle room for you to tell me what your intent is by saying it seems like, because I don't want to try to dictate what your intent is. I'm giving you room to help me understand how I'm meant to interpret this. This is how language works, right? Like, I'm not able to read the ones and zeros inside your head. We have to use language for you to try to evoke the concepts in my brain and hope that they...
We don't have to use language. Actually, you can have concepts evoked in your brain without any type of language whatsoever, but go ahead.
Well, I'm actually curious to know how you can achieve that.
You can do it just simply through body movements.
Yeah, we call that language, body language.
So now we're moving the goalpost from verbal language to body. Okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
Okay, so the point is, I'm saying it seems like, because this is my understanding, right? Like, and I want to give you room to help clear any misunderstandings. Okay. So I'm saying it seems like, because I don't want to say that it is definitely objectively the case, right? That's
fence-setting language, by the way. You don't want to objectively postulate anything as being true. So you say the word seems. It's a very evasive way to do things. But go ahead.
Well, I understand that language is an imperfect metric.
What does that have to do with the price of tea in China?
Okay, so in this moment, you and I are having a discussion, right?
Yeah.
You are trying to help me understand thoughts that are in your head.
Yeah.
Can I read those thoughts?
No, that's why I've literally told you what they are precisely.
But it's not precise, no matter how precisely you think they are. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 passes to reframe things so that I can get a more accurate picture of what's in your head.
Okay.
So
go
if
ahead with seems like.
Sure. Like, I just want you to understand that this is a thing that I'm doing on your behalf so that you don't feel like I'm putting you in a box.
I feel fortunate. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So it seems like to me that you are trying to convince people right now in the audience that there are people in quote unquote the background, so people that did not make any sort of public statement on this Dylan Burns situation, that here to date, the average person has not been made aware of, and that you are aware of them.
And that I'm aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
And when did I say this?
When you said, I know there are people in the background and I have evidence and I can substantiate it in the future.
That there are people who operate in the background of Twitch, yes.
That there are specific individuals which the average person...
Which operate in the background of Twitch, the average person doesn't know about. Yeah, that's true too.
In this Dylan Burns situation.
I never postulated that. I just said that if you can logically assume that it's possible and likely true.
I mean, possible and likely true. I just don't think this language is responsible to project unless you have something to show us.
See, and there we go again, right? So I'm not allowed to have any type of suspicion unless I can give you evidence immediately outside of my evidence of suspicion, which you agree logically I should be suspicious.
I think some suspicion
makes no sense.
So
makes
I think
no sense, and you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, Supreme.
Mm-hmm. So I think it makes sense to be suspicious. I think some suspicion can be warranted, and I think that's fine. But I think that you're taking an extra leap beyond suspicion and saying, well, not only is maybe some suspicion warranted, but it's actually likely, the thing that I'm suspicious about is likely to be true.
If you're suspicious about something, do you investigate it?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And what would you investigate? Things that you logically would assume might be the case.
Yeah, I think we call that we call that an analytic leap.
Then that just took care of that, didn't it?
But there's a pretty big line between feeling reasonable and being suspicious about something, between reasonable suspicion and arguing that something is likely to be true.
It's a reasonable suspicion, and it's likely to be true. Yes.
So I don't think those two are the same thing.
I didn't say that they were the same thing.
I think those things are quite different.
I said and between both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is there suspicion, but and also it's likely to be true.
So I think, and I'm going to try to help you understand why this is really important, especially when it comes to like this item of sexual harassment allegations, right? I think it's very, very important to understand that if you are trying to make the case that something is likely to be true, that you have some evidence to substantiate it. Because like this situation where Prime Kai was implicated for committing some sexual harassment beyond what they had evidence to substantiate.
It's likely to be true. He was fucking the secretary of his competition.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about Prime in this situation. So somebody is being...
Hang on, back up. He was fucking his competition's secretary. It's okay to be suspicious. And it's okay to follow that suspicion to what you would think would be its logical conclusion as you're in search of evidence. But if you can't present evidence, your suspicion's unwarranted. It's absurd.
Well, suspicion and arguing that something is likely to be true are two different things. In this case, like both sides have already reconciled their understanding of the situation. An investigator,
if both of them have reconciled it. Doesn't matter if a person comes in, shoots your wife, and you go shake the hands of the person who shot her. Supreme. Doesn't matter, right? Because it affects more people than just that.
The point is that like everything that is releasable and some form of investigation has been conducted that has satisfied both parties, right? And so listen, if I were to harass or accuse you of sexually harassing somebody and saying that it's likely to be true because you have like a history of statements that many people might interpret to be misogynistic or something like that, and because of some other interaction that you have,
I guarantee it.
Sure. So if I were to say that it's reasonable suspicion, if you were to have some negative interaction with a woman on this platform and say that it may be reasonable to suspect that you may have sexually harassed them, would that be the same as arguing that it's likely to be true?
No, I didn't say it would.
Okay. And I think it's really really important to understand this distinction, because this is the problem.
We're not arguing the distinction. How many times do you
I think we need to
an answer?
I think we need to argue the distinction.
I know you think we need to argue, but there's nothing to argue. We've already cleared the air. It's already done. We've already taken care of it. We've already made the distinction, and I've already conceded both points that I'm in total agreement with you that yes and yes.
Okay, so just so we have a clear understanding, you do concede that, like, if you're positing that there are movers and shakers in the background and that you can provide some evidence for this, but that you don't have it currently or something like that, that's like irresponsible. We do agree on that?
That wasn't the concession that was made. You're being disingenuous.
Well, you just told me.
You know what? In fact, I can prove that you're being disingenuous. Why don't you just repeat what you just said?
Sure. So in this moment, you said that you agreed with me and that you made concessions, yes and yes. And I want to know...
wait. Now you want to know something. But before you...
Sure, I want to know what's being...
Before you were just saying that this is what it was. Now you want to know something. That's interesting.
So... The reason I say that is because I did not believe it was the case that you agreed with me on this thing in the moment you were...
Then why are you talking out of both sides of your mouth?
I don't think that I am, right?
But you are.
I was saying I think we need to outline this distinction because it seems like we don't agree.
Then let's outline the distinction as clear as we possibly can.
Okay.
Not only do I think that there's movers and shakers who operate in the background of Twitch and can easily prove that in seconds, okay? But I also think that there's far more to this story that happened between Dylan Burns and Prime K's than the public knows about. Those are my two
postulations. Can you substantiate that?
Clearly and concisely.
Can you substantiate that there's more to the Dylan Burns Prime Kai thing?
With what? What would you like me to substantiate it with besides logic and suspicion?
Sure. So logic and suspicion are, to be clear...
Did I tell you that I was going to present evidence for this at this time, or no?
Sure. Do we agree that logic and suspicion are not evidence? Do we agree with that?
No, they can be evidence, yeah.
They are. I would disagree. I would say that logic.
I don't think that you would disagree.
I would.
Give you examples of why you wouldn't disagree. For instance, if you were going to time how long it took a murderer to drive to a crime scene, how would you ferret that out for me?
So what you're discussing is what's called circumstantial evidence.
No. How would you ferret that out for me?
How would I ferret it out? How long it would take to drive to a crime scene or something like that?
Let's say,
is that what it was?
Let's say somebody gave you, something like 5 minutes, right? It took me 5 minutes to drive from point A to point B, and there was a murder that happened within that window, and then says, hey, there's no way I could have done it, blah, blah, blah. What would you do?
So if somebody had an alibi.
And then you would logically, what?
Well, hang on. You're missing some important pieces here. In this case, you're saying a murder occurred and somebody is suspected of committing the murder, right? And that person has an alibi saying, I could not have done it because I could not have been here in this amount of time. I just want to understand I understand this hypothetical correctly.
Absolutely.
So for somebody to have an alibi, they need to offer some evidence that they were in a certain place, right? So that's the evidence part.
So their evidence in this particular case is time, right?
Well, no, the evidence is not time. So there's
the evidence then.
Well, I'll tell you. There's a great story. There's a great YouTube video called "The Coldest Case Ever Solved." It's from a content creator named Matt Orchard, where he talks about a man who was wanted for murder and who was found guilty of a murder, and later evidence was substantiated to show that he could not have been where the murder took place when it took place. Okay, so this is like one-to-one analogous, right? And the thing that ended up exonerating him is because they established that it wouldn't be reasonable that he could get to where he was, which he had evidence to establish. He had a receipt from a post office where he made a phone call, right? That would be the evidence. The evidence is that it was recorded in a government ledger that this person...
But I don't care. That's a red herring to my scenario.
It's not a red herring.
That there was this evidence in this particular case. I'm talking about in this case, we only have time. He gives you a time frame, right? Let's say you go and you drive it out. You drive out the time frame, you figure out this is wrong.
So to be clear, it was circumstantial evidence that the amount of time it would have taken him.
I'm talking about this case and not my scenario.
It's analogous, right? Because
no, it's not. I'm being very specific.
Where is it not analogous?
Because I'm being very specific here that the only evidence that you have is time and logic.
That's not true.
It's not true.
In order to make the case that somebody did not have enough time to get to a crime scene, right? You have to establish that they were in a place that they had to drive from that would have taken a longer amount of time to reach place B, right?
Yeah.
They were in place A. It takes an amount of time to travel from place A to place B.
Right.
Okay, you have to establish they were at place A with evidence.
And how would you do that?
There has to be some concrete evidence. There's got to be some physical documentation.
Would you do that?
They have to establish some physical documentation, have something to show that verifies either some sort of like public record or like, like a phone call from a given location or camera footage that they were in a given location, or maybe some people's testimony. A bunch of corroborated testimony can be used in this regard. But this is what would be considered the evidence. The presence of time is not necessarily the only evidence we would use. It's not the reason and logic that exists as the evidence. You can make
your legs are falling off from all that backpedaling, Supreme.
Okay.
They're literally falling off of your hips, buddy.
I think I'm...
Aside,
okay.
That aside, just pushing in even more into this, right? Are you saying to me that you disagree with me? I just want to make this clear. Do you disagree with me that there's movers and shakers in the background of Twitch that people don't know about or see?
I mean, Twitch is a platform with like 12 million people. I think it is logic.
Yes would be fine.
Sure, I think it's logical to conclude that out of 12 million people, that some people, you know what I mean, like maybe communicating in DMs, sure, and that aren't making their DMs public.
The answer would be yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So the answer is yes. So now, would you agree that some of these movers and shakers are prominent?
I don't know what that means.
It means that they have connections between multiple different creators.
It's reasonable to assume that there are...
No, not assume. I'm not asking for a reasonable assumption. Isn't it true that there are prominent people in the background of Twitch that are not well known to the public that probably people like you know about even, but aren't in the public eye, who move between different creators?
Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Everybody I would have known about. So Kurt is one person I mentioned. Kurt is very much a public.
You're not answering my question.
Well,
one more
okay.
time, I'm gonna literally make it as concise as I possibly can.
Sure.
So you just
put me on the defense stand. Question me like a prosecutor again.
One more time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree that there are movers and shakers in the background of Twitch that are not in the public eye that have move between multiple content creators?
Okay, I want to make it clear that I have no reason to believe that's true right now.
Okay, but I'm asking you specifically, are there?
I have no reason to believe it's true.
Says that no?
If it's true, I don't know.
Okay, do you know of any?
I'm telling you that I don't.
You don't know of any?
I don't know of anybody that's a prominent person. We haven't really defined what that means. That is responsible.
Yeah, I defined it. It's a person who's not in the public eye, generally moves between various content creators, and oftentimes will move and shake different content out. Maybe they're organizers, things like this.
So I'm not aware of any person like this that has no public presence and that people otherwise don't.
Say no public presence, but limited to the point where the public generally wouldn't know about them.
Okay. So I mentioned somebody early in this conversation, Kurt, right? Mm-hmm. People know about Kurt, so he wouldn't qualify under these terms, right?
No,
and
they might still have somebody who knows about them, but that doesn't mean that they're generally in the public eye. I
feel reasonably certain that most people know that Kurt is like somebody who is like helping these people.
About specifically just Kurt. I'm asking if.
Well, that's the only person I know about that would qualify under these terms.
Okay, gotcha.
That of people who don't have like a public presence or a stream or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. I just wanted to make that clear. So there aren't any.
I don't know if there are or not. You would have to show me.
You don't know of any.
I don't know of anybody who's like a prominent. I mean, I can like go through my DMs right now. Like if these people are out there, they ain't talking to me. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, no.
The possibility that people like this exist, it logically follows that I think it's reasonable to assume that people like this exist. Now, I suspect that the reason you're bringing this up is that you have earlier in this conversation posited that people of this nature exist and existed to a significant degree in their contribution to the Dylan Burns and Prime Kai situation. Is that correct?
No. I'm just wanting to get you to agree specifically that these people exist in the background and that you don't really know about them, you don't really see them, you don't really hear about them, and that they're the movers, shakers, and pushers between different content creators. And you have been extraordinarily evasive on that, just so you know, like extremely evasive about it.
I feel like I've been intellectually honest about it. Honestly, like that's my perspective, that I think it would be intellectually dishonest for me to say it. Not only is it reasonable to assume, but there definitely are, and I know who they are. If it's not the case,
you don't know any of them.
I don't even know that they exist.
You're just saying that logically, you assume so.
I think it's reasonable to assume that there might be people that are like aiding content creators. So one example of somebody that you might be like, I'm trying to understand the role that you're like outlining and saying that
you are. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, now there's an accusation that I know something and that I'm lying to you about it.
Yeah, I do think that you understand that these people are not only out there, but that you've dealt with them. Yeah, probably.
Can you substantiate that?
I don't need to. I just think that it's so.
So if you accuse me of something...
I didn't accuse you of anything. I'm just saying that this is what I think.
No, you have just accused me that I know of movers and shakers in the background.
No, I didn't accuse you of that. I said, this is what I think. I think for sure, right? I think for sure that almost everybody who is a Twitch content creator has dealt with these people, yeah.
Okay, and you think I'm one of those content creators?
I don't think there's any content creator who hasn't dealt with them.
So you think I'm one of those content creators?
Yeah, you would be one of those content creators.
And you think I'm lying to you about it now?
Show evidence. No, I can't show evidence for
Okay.
it. I can only explain specifically that they do exist and that I doubt almost any content creator has not run into them.
Okay. So just to be clear, you do think that I'm like dealing with movers and shakers in the background.
I think that every Twitch creator.
So you do think that
movers and shakers,
including me, right?
Everybody, yeah.
And if I'm telling you that I'm not dealing with such people,
yeah, but there's no way for me to substantiate that as being true or false one way or the other.
So it would be wrong to imply that it is true and that I'm lying about it.
It would be wrong. It would be a fair logical assessment.
Okay. It would be. I would say it would be wrong to imply that I'm lying about.
You would say that, but that doesn't mean it's true.
Sure. So I would argue
content creators deal with these people.
I would argue that it would be wrong to imply that I'm lying about something for the same reason it would be wrong to imply that somebody is guilty of sexual harassment if you didn't have evidence to substantiate it.
Tell me something, Supreme. When you agreed to do an interview on this program, was it a mover and shaker who asked for you specifically, or did I contact you directly?
Yeah, it was a streamer named Zonia.
A background mover and shaker. Right?
Well, I don't think Zonia is in the background. I think a lot of people know who Zonia is.
People know who Zonia is. But
she's been on Destiny's stream. She's spoken on Destiny's stream.
Zonia has been. However, Zonia is a mover and shaker. You agree that that's true?
Sure. I don't think she's in the back. I think she's. Right. I think she has a public presence.
Do you think that Zonia deals with people who aren't or don't have a public presence or much of one, who are also movers and shakers?
I don't like. I'm sorry. Can you rephrase that one more time? So, do I think
that Zonia, for instance, deals with people in the background who don't have much of a public presence but are movers and shakers?
Do I think Zonia deals with people in the background who do not have much of a presence but who they themselves are movers and shakers?
Yeah.
Do I think that?
Yeah. Just say yes, because you do.
Well, so it's yes. Well, hang on.
Just don't be evasive. Just say yes. Of course.
Well, you're not going to force me to say something I don't believe. If I want to make sure that we understand this, right? I want to make sure that I understand what I'm agreeing to. So a moment ago, it seems like you were trying to make the case that Zonia was one of these movers and shakers in the background that people don't know about or something like that. That's like coordinating things.
No, you're putting words in my mouth.
Okay, just so we understand that Zonia is not one of those people, or that you don't believe that she is.
I specifically asked, does she work with those people, would you say?
If she does, I don't know if that's true.
Okay, got it.
If you have evidence that that's true, I would like to see it.
Well, even if I had it, I wouldn't present it here on this stream.
Okay. Well, then I would say it's irresponsible to posit that it's true.
I don't think that it's irresponsible.
Well, that's a difference that we have. We agree to disagree on this.
Yeah. But in any case, the main thing that I wanted to postulate here, and I will postulate it again, and I absolutely stand behind it, is that there are movers and shakers who work in the Twitch background. I have dealt with them. I do believe that you've probably dealt with them, and so have most content creators, even though they don't have much of a public eye.
So you believe that I'm lying when I tell you that I have not?
Yeah.
Okay, so now you are accusing me of lying about a thing, and you don't have evidence for it.
No, just logic.
Okay, so I would say that this is wrong for the same reason that implying somebody is guilty of sexual harassment, accusing somebody of sexual harassment, if you do not have evidence for it, is irresponsible.
Belief means?
I think, yes, I know what belief means.
So what does it mean?
A belief means that you internally have concluded that a thing is true.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you need to postulate evidence for belief?
If I'm on camera and
Do you need to postulate evidence for belief?
Yeah, well, if I'm making a public declaration that I believe something is true, and
so the answer is no.
Well, and no, the answer is yes.
So you can try to reach whatever fucking conclusion that you want.
No, the answer is yes. If I'm making a public assertion that I believe something is true, and that belief comes at the expense of a person's character, or it comes with the implication of some like criminal or nefarious intent, then yes, I think you would have to present some evidence.
No. What's a belief?
A belief is like an internal conclusion that a thing is true.
Okay. Do Christians believe that homosexuality is immoral?
Some of them do, sure.
Does that come at the expense of other people, in your estimation?
It depends. It can. So if it's like the basis of legislation,
what do they have to do to justify their belief if they make a public declaration?
Mm-hmm. So in this case, if you are a Christian and you believe that homosexuality is immoral and it's based on the Christian faith, you can point to scripture that says this, right?
So you're saying, and would you believe the scripture?
Well, I personally don't, but if a person is...
You wouldn't believe it.
If a
so
person...
the person who's publicly postulating it, you wouldn't believe them, right?
Well, if a person is saying that I agree with this scripture, which very much exists, right, then they are establishing how their beliefs are religious.
So what? I have already established how my beliefs operate and told you exactly why I believe what I believe.
You have logically concluded that it is likely.
And is logic something that I can point to just like scripture?
Well, in this case, no. But if you're logically...
Yes. No, the answer is yes. Just say yes.
But
You're
it's
the most evasive person I've ever dealt with. The thing is, Rob Noah always makes a great point on this. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost every single question, when you play this back, I've tried to answer concisely with things like yes, things like no, be as concise as I possibly can. You don't do that. You're very evasive in almost everything that you say. You don't say yes, you don't say no. It's all very non-committal. It's all very circular. It's what we call sophistry. And that's what I think. I think we're dealing with a lot of sophistry. The thing is like, just say yes, just say no, commit. You know what I mean? Just commit to something.
Well, I'm not going to commit to something if I don't believe it's true, or if I don't have a solid reason to believe it's true. And I think that there's an extra bar that ought to be reached if you are positing a belief that a person is guilty of some like nefarious action or some criminal action if you don't have the evidence to believe it. What I'm arguing for is in favor of...
Is your hair long?
I think most people consider that my hair is long, especially for...
I'm going to take a position on that, right?
I literally just said that, yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume, like, most people would agree that my hair is long.
Just yes or no?
Well, the reason I wouldn't say yes or no is because it's a subjective question. Like, the answer to this question is up to subjective interpretation.
Is it your belief your hair is long?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, by the measure of how people consider hair to be short or long.
Which people?
People in the society I live in.
Okay, which people specifically think your hair is long?
I think the overwhelming majority of people would say that my hair is relatively long.
Can you point to a biblical passage proving that? Or any evidence at all proving that people think your hair is long, Supreme?
Sure, I can actually. I can poll my audience. I can look at social trends of how long the average man's hair is, right? And I say that, especially like for a man, I think my hair is considered to be long. Okay. But that's based on social paradigms.
This is your belief, though.
It's my belief, and it is my agreement that the subjective measure of whether or not my hair would be considered long or short in the society that I exist in today, most people would consider my hair to be long. And I agree with that assessment.
So it's reasonable to assume it.
Well, it's not just reasonable to assume it. You can see it.
But wait, that's what you're saying is it's reasonable to assume it. Based on your belief, you haven't polled your audience. You didn't do any of that. You just assumed it.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you believe? Is there anything I've said that you disagree with?
I've already told you what I believe because I'm using belief. I'm not positing anything with evidence, nor did I say I was going to. Not once inside this entire conversation. All I did by pointing out the hair length was you saying, I assume with belief. There you go. That's the same exact fucking thing that I'm doing. Now, that is actually analogous, sir.
Okay. The thing that I think is like kind of curious about this interaction is that you pulled me on here and we started this interview with you telling me that you appreciated the level of information assurance and the amount of...
It turned into a debate. It's
well,
happened.
Well, hang on. And the amount of journalistic rigor and ability to evaluate and assess evidence and be able to establish which claims had been.
I said I liked your coverage. I thought it was pretty good.
Okay, fair enough.
The rest of it, you're all putting in.
So what about the coverage was good?
I thought that you had pretty good takes that night on what was going on. I preferred watching your stream over anybody else's that particular night.
Why?
It actually seemed like because you had some type of relationship with the people who were involved.
So I do have like a personal relationship with Dylan and with Prime. Yes, those people are friends of mine.
It's my belief that I was watching the right stream for that then.
So the only reason
that with evidence, though.
So the only reason you appreciated my footage or my coverage of that event is because I'm friends with Dylan and Prime?
I think that it made your takes better, yeah.
Okay. So you thought the takes were good. Why?
I just told you why. I thought that you were reasonably walking through it as these events were unfolding. But you weren't using nearly as much sophistry that night as you are right now in this conversation. But I don't mind sophistry. I cut through it it doesn't mean anything to me. You know what I mean?
So which takes were good, specifically, that you remember?
Specifically, when the bombshell dropped that Dylan was dating this gal, I thought the way that you handled that was pretty good. Now I'd have to go back and review the VOD in order to, see play-by-play. I had you going in the background while all of that was going on. Unlike a lot of streamers, I'm a blue-collar guy. I actually work for a living, and I usually listen to things like this in the background. But what this has to do with anything, I have no idea.
Can you generally sort of just give your general feelings on your recollection of what about the takes you thought was good or how I handled that situation?
I told you exactly what I thought.
Well, I mean, it seemed like you were getting into it, but then you just said, but I was listening to it in the background and so on and so forth.
I don't remember everything. Dude, it was
sure, that's fine. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Like, what do you want from me here?
Oh, I just want you to describe what about my coverage was good other than the fact that I was friends with the two people involved. Or
I think that because you were close to the people who were involved, your takes were better because you had something of an inside track.
Okay, but do you remember?
While everybody else was scrambling to figure out what was going on, you kind of knew what was going on.
But I didn't.
Okay, but it seemed like in the stream, okay, that, you did. That's all.
So what about the takes? It seems like I had takes that you agreed with, or that
I don't know. I'd have to go back and review it.
Okay.
It's not even reasonable to ask me to remember which individual takes that you did. The impression that I was left with is that I just liked them. That's it.
That sounds like sophistry to me, but that's fair enough. I have to accept that.
What about it sounds like sophistry?
So it seems like you came in and you were really convinced. Man, I just I thought you had really great takes on this. Oh, really? Like, what did you agree with? What were some takes that you agree with?
I just told you.
Well, I don't remember.
When that bombshell dropped, you handled it well.
Yeah, but why did you think I handled it well?
I don't recall. I just remember the impression was that you did.
Well, that seems really fair.
That actually does seem fair. I could actually pull up the VOD, go through the VOD, and tell you the precise takes that I enjoyed, I suppose.
So I would just say, if it's the case that you don't remember anything that I said and you don't even remember why you agreed with it.
I don't remember anything that you said. I said about your takes. That's all.
Sure. So if it's the case,
why do you keep doing that? By the way, why do you keep saying what you do? Is you go, if it's the case, and then you reframe everything that I just said, right? And then if I ask you to repeat it, you can't even repeat back to me what you had just said a few minutes before. It's bizarre. Why do you do that? That's not how you have conversations with people, man.
It's because I'm trying to make clarifications so that I understand you. You're free to push back and say, no, that's not what I said. What I said was this.
When I want a clarification, I might say something like, what do you mean? Or what about this thing specifically are you talking about? Or this kind of thing.
Sure. So if I hear you say a thing in a bunch of different ways, I think it's important to reach clarification, for me to repeat back to you my understanding based on what you've said, and for you to hear that and say, yes, I agree, that's what it is, or to say, no, that's not what I meant. Here's this detail that you misinterpreted. That's how we reach clarification. We compare.
Well, how many times do I have to say the same thing and then have you reframe it and then I have to say it again? What you're trying to do is when you reframe it enough times, right, you're trying to get me to say something that wasn't stated before, and then you latch onto that thing. It's bizarre, and it's not necessary. That is what sophistry is. It's not good faith, in other words. It's not a good faith conversation. So if I say to you, look, I liked your takes that night. You say, man, well, what specifically did you like? Well, there was a time that came up. I don't remember the exact details, but when this bombshell dropped, I thought you handled it well. Well, what specific details? Man, I don't remember. Yeah, but that sounds like you're being so... That's so bad faith, man. It doesn't even make sense.
Well, I said it was fair. To be clear, I said it was fair if you don't remember like every specific thing or something like that. And then I went on to just say, well, if it's the case that you don't remember like what... I
kind of liked you, by the way. I also kind of liked you because you threw politically provoked out of your chat, and I thought that was fucking hilarious. Like,
sure.
To be honest with you.
Okay.
But in any case, right, this type of stuff, like this is becoming sophistry. And what I've done is I've been like, yes, no, yes, 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 yes. And if I try to get you to give me a straight answer, it sounds like you just don't want to get pinned with one.
Well, I'm trying to give the most accurate answers that I can.
I just think that, well, accurate's yes. Is yes not an accurate answer?
It depends on your ability to substantiate, whether or not you agree with the truth of a concept.
Okay, back up. Is yes an accurate answer or not?
Well, it can be an inaccurate answer, and it can be an accurate answer. And it can be the case that...
Okay, got it. So it can be an accurate answer. So let's just pretend that I don't understand anything other than yes or no for a second, okay? And if I ask you something like, is your hair long, how would you respond?
Is there a thunderstorm in Tulsa, Oklahoma right now? Yes or no?
No.
What if there is, though?
What if there is?
Wait, like, how can that be accurate if you don't actually know if there's a thunderstorm in Tulsa?
I'm not loading the questions. That's what that's called. It's like asking a person, how long have you been gay? That's a loaded question.
Okay, that's true.
It has a presupposition. I'm not asking you things with a presupposition.
Wait, asking if there's a thunderstorm in Tulsa, Oklahoma is a loaded question?
In this particular case, it is because, there's no way for me to have access to such information.
So it's not reasonable for you to demand a yes or no answer from you?
In your case, it's not. But in most cases, it is. For instance, is it reasonable for me to ask you if you have long hair for you to say yes?
So... the way that I understand...
One more time, is it reasonable for me to ask you if you have long hair for you to say yes?
Yeah, I think it is reasonable.
Okay, thanks, man. That's all I'm asking.
But I don't think that's...
Why? Because it's not loaded, there's no presuppositions, there's no bullshit.
So what was my answer to that question when you asked if I have long hair?
Your initial answer to it was, sophistry.
That was my answer, was sophistry?
Yeah, you kind of hoomed and hawed about it. Like, there's almost no engagement that I have with you that you're not evasive. It's very difficult to actually pin down anything that you say, and most of it is you trying to be very circular. It's bizarre.
Okay,
so let's just have a straight conversation, right? Okay, so straight conversation. Dylan Burns was fucking his competition secretary. Yes?
Well, I'm not sure if Dylan...
See what I mean? Like, you just can't do it. It's
hold on.
Not possible.
That's an actual loaded question, and we have to define the elements of that I think are loaded, and we have to... Sure. So, for example, when you refer to Prime Kai, if you ask me, was Dylan Burns having sex with Prime Kai's, with a woman who was working for Prime Kai, I would say yes, because I know all of the elements of that to be true. But the way that you framed that was he fucking his competition secretary? Now, it's loaded to say that Prime Kai is, we ought to consider it in this situation, Dylan Burns' competition. And I think that they're... Why what?
Why would you consider that to be loaded? Was Prime K's Dylan Burns' competition?
So... I think...
You just can't do it, man. It's like impossible for you. Just say yes.
So I think there are... I think there are elements, I think there are details to the dynamics of their relationship where we would not necessarily consider them to be competing. For one, wait, hang on. For one,
depends on how you look.
For one, they operated on different time slots. Okay? For two,
depends on how you look at it. It's what you're saying.
Well, we have to be able to establish if it's actually true that they're competitors in order to posit that question. Is that not fair?
No, I don't think it is.
You don't think it's...
So if you think that based on all of those assumptions, for instance, that they were on different time slots, this and that, blah, 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 you should be able to come up with a yes or no answer to that, right?
Well, the question, I'm telling you where the question is loaded. You're asking me to accept that they're competitors.
No, it's not loaded now. We're just focusing on this one part.
Which one?
And so this one part of them being on different time slots and this and that, so they weren't or they were competition. That's what I'm asking. Were they or weren't they?
Sure. Why do you think they were competitors?
That's not what I asked you. Were they or weren't they?
I think suspicion, or like, I think the consideration of whether or not they're competitors is important, right? Is important to evaluating this interaction. Do you agree?
Evaluate it and tell me yes or no.
Sure. So we can evaluate it together. One thing that sort of diffuses the idea that they were competitors was that Dylan Burns only runs a panel 1 day a week, right?
Okay, were they or weren't they?
And
on your analogy, that's what I'm asking you. Like,
well, hang on. And the panel that Dylan Burns hosted ran at a different time than the panel that Prime Kai hosted. So how could they be considered competitors?
So are they not competitors?
Were they? I'm asking you if they.
Asking you. No.
So
I've asked you this now 14 times.
Now who's being evasive?
What you do instead,
wait. Now who's being evasive?
I'm just going to recycle this and
sure.
recycle this until you have to answer no. Just answer the fucking question. Were they or weren't they? Say yes.
I would consider if they were operating on different time slots that they were not competitors. What would you consider?
So the answer is no?
What would you consider?
So was the answer no?
Sure. So based on this detail, that's how I would consider that question. The answer to that question.
Just fucking say no.
Because we had to reach an understanding of what.
You didn't have to do shit. I asked you, what do you think? And you went, well, sophistry. Just say no.
Well, hang on.
No.
Do you think that they were competitors?
Yes.
But even if they were operating at different time slots?
Even if they're operating on different time slots, yes.
How could they be competitors if they're...
Because, you might have been able to pin somebody down on this, but as a person who has set up tons and oodles and poodles of fucking debates and participated in them many, many times, even if you're operating on different time slots, even if it's 2 or 3 hours opposite, right? What ends up happening is you still have to share people, right?
No, if you're operating on different time slots, you don't have to share.
Even if you're operating on different time slots, you have to share.
How?
Well, let me give you an example of this. Let's say, for instance, that a person says, yes, I'm available on X day.
Okay.
And I'm available between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. My show runs at 6, and a slightly larger creator's show runs at 3. Now he has a choice to make of which one he goes on, right? I only have X amount of time to do a show. Okay, so he goes on the larger creator's show. Of course it's competition. It's foolish not to think so, right? So my answer concisely to you is yes. Now, why couldn't you have just said my answer concisely to you, Andrew, is no?
Well, because we have to understand, and I want to establish why I'm reaching a certain position.
I just need to know what you think. Yes or no.
But I think the audience needs to understand. And to be clear, I think the audience
needs to. They would never have understood the word yes or the word no.
Well, I think it's sure. So, do you think it's important if we're people who are like entertainers, and a big part of our entertainment is communicating to a group of people, like a set of positions?
What are you asking me a question? What's the question?
So, do you agree that we are two entertainers, and a big part of like our entertainment content is communicating to an audience a set of positions or opinions or beliefs, that sort of thing?
Sometimes.
Sure. Do you think that it's important for somebody whose core content is like delivering a set of opinions or positions to an audience that they supply some amount of reasoning to how we reach those positions? I think that's really important.
Do you assume that your audience is too stupid to understand the word yes or no?
I don't think it's a matter of whether or not I think they're too stupid.
Explain to them why they need to accept the answer yes or no.
Yes.
I see. So you do think that they're too stupid to have intuitively reason to doubt for themselves?
Well, I think that leaving it up to them leaves a lot of room for people to come up with their own reasoning that may not align with my reasoning. And if I'm asking them to accept my position, the conclusion of my reasoning, I think it's important to supply that reasoning so they understand what my reasoning is, and not to leave them to their own devices to just guess what it is.
So then I assume that on your stream you never just say yes or you never just say no and expect that your audience is going to understand what that means. To
be clear, the conversation that I have on my stream are very similar to this one, where if I'm being asked a question, I want to make sure that I understand the question, that I am operating with the exact same concept of what the question is and what I'm being asked, that I clarify that with the person asking the question, and that I supply my reasoning to how I reach my answer. Yeah, that's a big.
So essentially, you're saying any conversation that I have with you, if I ask you a direct question, that you're going to have to go through tons and tons of I don't know. So I would call it sophistry, but in order to explain to your audience why they should come to the same conclusion that you have.
Yeah. So if I think that the question is ambiguous or there's some uncertainty in one or two of the details of the question, I'm going to focus on that and like look for agreement with the asker and ask, is this what you mean by that? Is that what you mean by this?
So now that we've gone through all that, and I understand that this is something that you just absolutely have to do for whatever the purpose is, because you think that this is how you need to relate with your audience or whatever, it doesn't really matter to me. That's your business. We can establish, though, that you did not think that Dylan Burns and Prime K's were competition.
So based on that terminology, are they competition? To be clear, I think the thing that you mentioned about how there is some competition over the time of entertainers that they're able to book for their shows, I think that's valuable. And I think that is one item that we would consider, that there was some level of competition between the two. I think that's reasonable.
I just want to let you know, if you rewind the VOD, you said no when you were pressed on it.
Sure, I can provide my reasoning for why I would come up with the total conclusion of no. Because while it is, I think that is one element, right? I think that is one element where we would consider that these two are competing for, star power or the limited resource of time, to like some entertainers or something like that.
Sharing guests, right?
Right. First off, there's it's pretty abstract and it's pretty loose because people.
Not very abstract.
Well, I'll explain why. Because a person who can do, a show at 3 that ends at 6, and if another show starts at 6, they can do that show at 6 as well. But I understand that people have limited time and energy to be able to do these shows. And so it's reasonable for a person to not, if they were invited to both, to agree only to do one over the other. I think that's fine. While it's not explicitly precluded from every individual who may have been invited to both on the same day, and I know people that have done both on the same day, I think that it is an important element for consideration. But when asked the question if they are in competition, or if I would regard Prime as being like primary competition for Dylan Burns, I would primarily consider the audience, and there's no reason to believe that they could not share the exact same audience if they were operating at different times.
Wait, they're sharing something?
Yeah, that they could not both have the same exact individuals watching both of their content if they were operating at the same time. And that would be like
they weren't operating at the same time, you said.
Yeah, they were not operating at the same time. So the same individuals.
So wait, just to make sure. So what you're saying to me then is that people who are on completely different schedules, right? They have time to maybe watch TV through, or YouTube entertainment between the hours of X and X. They're not competition for each other because, well, that show comes on a little bit later, so you can catch them both, even though time considerations in a human life don't operate that way. It never do. But I'll just take you at your word that that's so.
Okay. So if Prime was running his show, let's say from 9 to midnight, and Dylan was running his show from 6 to 9, if a person could not catch Prime's 9 to midnight show, does the presence of Dylan's 6 to 9 show matter?
Yeah, it still matters.
Why?
I just told you why.
But what would be the thing that would preclude a person from watching from 9 to midnight?
All these things recorded.
I believe they are, yes.
Yeah, so if I didn't like one show, I could just not watch that show and then go back and watch the recording of the show that I liked, right?
You're making arguments in my favor now. Interesting.
Not in your favor. It's the opposite of your favor.
Is it?
I'm saying, yeah, it is. What I'm saying to you very specifically is this. You're saying they could share the exact same audience. What I'm saying to you is, look, man, if I don't like you, right? If I don't like your program, or I don't like this or that, I can just go back and watch the pre-recorded VOD from the other creator. But I can't do that if the other creator's not around, can I?
Yes, that's true. And one reason we would consider that people operating on the same time slot to be competitors in the Twitch space is because a big part of Twitch is like the interaction, being able to chat and like chat with people live and have interactions with chatters and stuff like that, right? Like, that's a big draw of the entertainment. Like, watching a VOD is not very popular on Twitch because a big draw of Twitch as an entertainment platform is the ability to chat in real time to both the creators and to other people who are experiencing it at the same time, right?
Oftentimes during these debates, not anybody in the chat is actually engaged with at all.
I'm sorry?
During many of these debates, nobody in the chat is engaged with because, they're having a debate.
Are you reading a chat right now?
No.
Oh, I am.
So,
I mean, like,
that's
it sounds...
not engaging with them. What the fuck are you talking about? Do you think that just reading a chat is engaging with the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what you meant by engagement.
Well, I mean, they're certainly, like, influencing the way that I think about things to some degree.
Oh, man. So you think that what's going on is with the engagement of the chat, that the chat is influencing the moderator, and that's why they watch the show? Like, what the fuck are you talking about, man?
Well, if that's true for one half of this encounter, think about a panel with, like, 9 to 16 people or whatever, right? Like, and again, it's...
reading their own chats, engaging with their chats. They're not engaging specifically with the host chat.
It depends on the individual, right? It depends on who's on.
It's not common, man. Come on. What are you fucking talking about here? You know it's not common.
Sure. So this is one element for consideration. I don't know if this is common or not. I know that I read the chat. I know some other creators who read the chat while they're having these conversations as well. But again, it's
a hosted live debate panel right now, for God's sake. What are you talking about?
What does it matter? Like, I'm saying that when
it matters because you're saying that most of it is due to chat engagement, and I'm saying
sure,
most of the time
chatters can engage with each other.
Panels are not able to engage directly with the chat at all.
It's interesting that you're, like, so intent on making, like, arguments that favor my position on this when I'm actually trying to give credit to.
How am I fucking making any argument in your position on this? What you're saying makes no sense. This was your postulation.
So to be clear, it seems like you're arguing that they are not competitors because even if they operate at the same time, it doesn't matter because you can just watch a VOD.
And what did I qualify that with?
You can, refresh me.
If the person isn't there anymore, the VOD's not there to watch, right?
If the person's not there anymore, the VOD's not...
So if people don't like Dylan Burns and they're like, look, I would normally be available during that time slot, but fuck that guy, he sucks. I like Prime K's. I'm going to go watch the VOD. Now, Prime K's isn't around. Who's left?
Okay, so you're saying that one motivation Dylan might have to eliminate Prime Kai off the platform is to free people up to watch Dylan's VODs?
Of course.
Okay.
Not just his VODs, but even then to try to drift over to his content live. So might just start with there's nothing else to watch.
So the conspiracy...
Now, you're the only guy on planet Earth, I guess, who has been like, hey, why are you watching that, honey? And you go, because there's nothing else on. You're the only guy that's never happened to, I guess. Wicked. You're the only dude who's never been watching a show and someone said, why are you watching this shit? And you say, because there's nothing else on. That's you. You're that guy. That's never happened to then?
So I have to be honest, I'm going to need some help connecting this thought to the previous thought.
So let's try to connect it for you.
Okay.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're watching a program that's not very interesting or that you don't even really care that much about because there was nothing else to watch?
Yes.
Okay, then. Would you assume that people who are in market competition with each other would also have been in those situations in their life like everybody else on planet Earth?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Would you assume that everybody else has been in those situations as well? Watching whatever program is there because there ain't nothing else to watch.
Would I assume that everybody else has done that? No, I would not.
Most people.
Most people? I think that this is a common thing, sure. Mm-hmm. But I don't think watching VODs is... I don't think watching VODs is...
Here I am, and I'm like, I want to knock out my competitor. Why do you want to knock out your competitor? Let's say you own a gun shop. Let's say you own whatever the fuck you want. So that there's no choice. Right? There's no choice. Let's say you run a shittier gun shop than this guy over here, for instance. Right? But if you're the only game in town, where do people got to go? Okay, so I want to understand clearly that you're positing a conspiracy theory that Dylan wanted to eliminate Prime. Go again. You're positing this. You can't even respond to what I said because you know it's fucking true.
Well, I don't know that it's true, which is why I'm asking to clarify. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now I'm positing a conspiracy theory, even though I never said anything about a conspiracy on this. What I said to you specifically is that if you wanted to knock out your competition so that you were the only game in town, that you seem to think that that's absurd because, well, that gun shop over there, they ran the hours of 8 to 7 and you run between 11 to 9.
So in this case, you're suggesting the possibility that Dylan may have wanted to eliminate Prime, and one reason that he may have wanted to do so was to free up people who would have been watching Prime to now watch Dylan Burns' VODs.
Not just his VODs, but then to drift over to his live streams, yeah.
But he could have, but a person could have watched both live streams.
But what if they just didn't like his programming?
What do you mean his program? Then they wouldn't watch.
What do you mean? What do I mean? What if they didn't fucking like his program?
Then they wouldn't watch. So you think there would be?
They wouldn't watch. But if he was the only game in town, well,
there's
much like with every other. So you want me to assume that though every other business and corporation operates under this exact same umbrella, that these guys were the only ones who didn't?
There are 4 million active streamers every month. So I think
what?
Okay,
There's not 4 million active, massive debate platforms every month, are there, Supreme?
Sure, fair enough. But I think the idea that Dylan would have considered eliminating Prime because there may be some number of people
because he wanted to knock out his competition is absurd.
Because some number of people were not free to watch Dylan Burns' VODs. Because they were too busy watching Prime's panels, and that those people would now be.
What I said. What I said specifically is as follows, and I'll be very specific again, and you'll just reframe it again and do sophistry again because this is what you do. I don't know why you do it, but everybody I think understands completely and totally what I'm saying. If you're the only game in town, as you've readily admitted yourself, if there's a program on of some kind that you're not even that interested in, you'll still watch it because, well, there's fucking nothing else on. You think that though this is not good motivation for people to want to knock out the competition for people who are the only other large game in town. That to me is not only absurd, but fucking stupid.
Sure.
Its face.
So I would argue that it's absurd and fucking stupid to posit that watching Twitch VODs is so popular that a person would be intent on ruining a person's career and reputation to gain, I don't even think you get no ad revenue from somebody watching a VOD. There's no monetary incentive. There's no incentive to a person's...
Up the VOD. I just clearly laid this out.
Because they weren't operating in the same time slot.
There was literally one section of the overarching point that I was making.
Because you're trying to make the case that they're competitors.
Because you can't respond to what I'm saying.
No, I am responding to what you're saying.
Sure that if you're the only game in town, you're going to get more views or less.
Listen, if you're the only game in...
I don't know. If I'm the only game in town, I have no idea.
If you're going to get more views or less, I don't think it's necessarily true that you will get more. If you, as a game in town, are operating in a place that does not compete with another game in town. If they operate on different time slots, there's no reason that a person can't watch both.
So again, one more time.
Mm-hmm.
You have a convenience store. There's another convenience store a few blocks down. And it's smaller and shittier than yours. Okay? But you want to increase your revenue. And an opportunity comes up for you to knock out the competition. Right? Would you, as a business owner, right, with no moral scruples, let's say, knock that business out in order to increase your revenue?
So I would say this is disanalogous.
It's of course you would, even though everybody on planet Earth would not say that except you.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true, but the reason I would say that this is disanalogous, if we wanted to draw a more accurate analogy, I would say you, as a convenience store, you sell peanut butter, okay, and the other convenience store sells mayonnaise. The other convenience store does not sell peanut butter, and you do not sell mayonnaise. Now, if there are customers who want to purchase peanut butter and mayonnaise, eliminating the mayonnaise store does not necessarily mean this person will come to your store and buy peanut butter.
Wait a second. I'm sorry. Are you saying that both of these platforms don't run debates?
They do, but they do at different times, so they're not competing over people's resources.
So they're running the same product. They're just running them in different time slots. So why would the mayonnaise and peanut butter be analogous?
Because if a person had the availability and the desire to purchase both goods, it doesn't serve the person who...
Wait a second. Wait. They're selling the same good.
They're not selling the same good. One's selling mayonnaise, one's selling peanut butter.
Said that they were selling the same good. This is why your analogy is disanalogous.
But the way that they're selling...
Two peanut butter stores, and one peanut butter store decided that, hey, I'm going to take out my peanut butter selling competition. Do you think they'd sell more peanut butter?
So if a person wanted to purchase peanut butter...
You can't say yes, can you?
Well,
everybody knows the answer to this is yes.
I know it. You know it. Everybody knows it.
They do. Like, nobody would not say yes to this. Nobody would be like, nope.
That makes me fear for humanity if that's true.
Have to look at whether it was chunky, if it was thick peanut butter, maybe if it was creamy peanut butter. We wouldn't. You know what I mean? Like, come on, man. Of course, if you knock out your competition and you're the only game in town, your revenue is going to increase by default.
So, what would cause a person to buy peanut butter from store A instead of from store B?
Maybe it's cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. So if peanut butter is cheaper at store A, they would have no reason to go to store B.
But what if store B decided that they were going to knock out store A? Would they go to store B then?
Sure, maybe. But is Dylan's content cheaper than Prime's?
No. Would they go to store B then?
It would make sense, yeah, if they wanted peanut butter, that they would be forced to go to store B. But is Dylan's peanut butter cheaper?
Like, we did all the sophistry for you to come up with the answer.
Is Dylan's are his panels or watching his content, is that cheaper than watching Prime's content?
In this particular case, you asked me for an example of why.
I'm trying to outline why this is disanalogous.
Of examples of why you would want to knock your competition out, though.
I'm trying to outline why this is... Listen, every time I try to talk, you're talking over me now, and it seems to me like you're trying to avoid confronting the substantive... Okay, sure. Sure. So, since there's no conflict, in this case, let's say this. At store A, you get one free jar of peanut butter. The rest you have to pay for. In store B, you get one free jar of peanut butter. The rest you have to pay for. So people who want peanut butter can go to store A and get one free, and go to store B and get one free. Now, does eliminating store B help? If the people who are coming to those stores are coming for free peanut butter, does eliminating store B help store A?
Yeah.
How?
Well, because you said that only the first jar is free and the rest of them they have to pay for. So therefore, logically, if you knocked out store A, they would still get the free jar of peanut butter, but they would probably buy more peanut butter from store.
But they're not buying peanut butter at either place. They're only coming for the free peanut butter.
Oh, I see. So it's just all free.
Well, Twitch content is free to view.
I see. So I wonder why all of these large content creators put it on then, since there's no revenue involved, right?
Sure. So in this case, similarly, if two streams are occurring at different times, we wouldn't consider that they're competing.
Okay, that's not what I asked you. There's no revenue involved, right?
Yeah, there is.
Oh, okay, there is. So it's not free then. Right,
but in this case, we're talking about two merchants that are selling things that we would not consider to be in competition. And listen, you know what? In this case, the peanut butter merchants, we would consider to be in stronger competition than two streamers operating in different time slots.
You would consider them that. However, what we've actually deemed and established here was that it would still be in the streamer's interest to knock out the competition, making them the only game in town. You still have not been able to articulate why that's not true, even though I've articulated why it is.
I'll say it again. The reason I don't think it's true is because they operate in different time slots and there's no competition over people's time.
In your worldview, then, and I just want a yes or no, even though I know I won't get one, but I'm going to try anyway. I'm not going to load it. I'm not going to know. If Prime K's disappeared tomorrow, you don't think that Dylan Burns' view count for his debates would go up? I just want to make sure that I got that
correct. I don't believe that it would be reasonable to conclude that if they operate at different time slots.
You don't think that it would be logical to conclude that?
Why would it be logical to conclude that?
What about guests? We already went over that too, didn't we?
Sure, I think there's some consideration about like how guests have to make a choice in their time, if they only have X amount of time, during the day or whatever.
What about the money that comes in for various people, as you've just established that there's revenue involved with this? What about the people who now have no choice but to watch the one program? Do you think that the revenue would increase for that program if they were the only game in town?
You know what? I think it would be logical to assume that like maybe Dylan's bottom line would be padded like slightly. Some people who only want to subscribe to one channel or something like that, if they want to use their Prime, maybe they would use it on Dylan's channel instead of Prime's. But I feel like...
Okay, well then that negates everything that you just said.
Well, I just don't think it's reasonable to think that Dylan would be intent on like destroying a person unjustly if he didn't believe that it was just for like the prospect of... I don't know, what would amount to probably an extra $10 a month or something like that, or $20 a month or something. Like, I don't think that would be true for very many people.
Mm-hmm. There was a question that came in. I'm going to wrap this up because we're almost at the 2-hour mark. I'll let you ask whatever you want before I do, of course. But there was a question that came in from Dan Zammit, and he said, Andrew, ask him if he could logically come up with as many ways as he can that the two shows would be competitive.
Sure.
So he wants me to use sophistry, but go ahead, man.
Well, I wouldn't call that sophistry.
No, that's not sophistry, but what's about to happen is going to be. Well, go ahead.
Okay. Well, if what I'm about to say is sophistry, I'm just going to make your arguments, and then you can call it sophistry. How's that?
Go ahead.
Well, is that what you want to do?
No, I'm not. If you don't actually use sophistry, I will be amazed.
But you've just poisoned the well and said whatever I'm going to say is sophistry.
I didn't say that.
How is that anything but sophistry?
What are you talking about?
You just said what we're about to get from you is sophistry.
Yeah, that's what I think is going to happen.
So you've poisoned the well. So no matter what I say by virtue is you're going to be considering is inaccurate.
Prove me wrong. There you go.
Prove you wrong? Okay, do you want to just take it back and say, okay, I don't mean that?
Prove a negative, just in case you were going to say you couldn't. But go ahead.
Well, I think you can.
There's a question.
Okay, so I do think the two things that you brought up would be valuable considerations to suspect why a person might be motivated. And I think it is important to ask me to test my ideas to come up with like the best arguments against the position that I've taken. Okay, I think that is valuable. I don't call this sophistry. I would say that this is critical to providing reasoning to reach a position, to test it as hard as you can. Do you disagree?
Go ahead. Test it.
Do you disagree with what I've just said?
No. Test it.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned competing over the time slots of like, the entertainers, the guests or something like that. I do think that that's a valuable consideration. And that would be one chip in the favor of Dylan considered them to be competing and he wanted to eliminate his competition. And the other one would be like the limited resources that a given viewer might have to give to only one panel show or something like that. Now, the reason I don't think those are that important, or the reason I don't believe, well, there are many reasons why I don't believe that Dylan was trying to eliminate his competition, right? But the reason I would not consider these to be really valuable considerations is because the amount of resources are very small, right? And the amount of people who would be watching Dylan Burns' VODs instead of watching Prime Kai, and the amount of benefit that provides to Dylan, I would consider to be likely negligible, because I know that very few people watch VODs. Like, watching VODs is not very popular on Twitch. And Prime Kai's viewer base is, in like the three figures, typically like the low three figures, so below 500, nowadays, between 1 and 300. I think the number of people that would watch Dylan Burns that otherwise do not because they're too busy watching Prime Kai's panel live is I would predict that to be single digit, if that, if anybody, if even a single person. So I just don't think that those are super valuable considerations, though they do exist as considerations.
So the question, one more time for you, is if you can logically come up with as many ways as you can for why the two shows would be competitive. I think all you did was repeat the things that I've already said to you. So I'm just wondering if you actually have some of your own.
I think they've been brought up.
Okay, yep. Well, what are they?
Well, I just said them, and we talked about them at length.
I brought up. Those are the only things that you can think of.
That Dylan would consider Prime competition. In this moment, I think those are really the only ones. If you have more, I'd be willing to review it.
No, it's fine, man. It's fine. Those are the only things you can bring up is the things that I brought up. Fair enough.
Well, can you think of any?
Yeah, I can think of many, but the question was directed at you.
I want to hear them.
Specifically, and all you did was regurgitate what I've already said. It's
okay.
You know what I mean? This is what I mean by this is why I knew you said you're poisoning the well, but I already knew what was coming. So the thing is like
so to be clear, the arguments that you brought up are sophistry.
No.
Wait, you just said that what I said.
The way that you responded was sophistry. All you did was respond.
The way that I responded is I said that
you come up with any of your own at all. But that aside, before I go, I'm a fair person. I really didn't mean this to turn into a debate, by the way. But
okay.
But before I wrap this up at the 2-hour mark, because I got other shit to do with my life, and I'm sure that you do too. I'll let you cross-examine me for whatever you want. Ask specific questions that don't have presuppositions or aren't preloaded, and guess what? I'll answer them with yes or no.
Sure. Is it 36 degrees Fahrenheit in Detroit, Michigan right now?
Let me check.
You can't answer yes or no?
The answer is no.
Okay. Why couldn't you answer yes or no before you found evidence?
I didn't know the answer to the question.
So what you needed to do was verify.
I can't answer in good faith if I don't know the answer to a question.
Until you investigate and search for evidence. And you found evidence that it was not 36 degrees Fahrenheit in Detroit. You were able to establish evidence that proved a negative, correct?
So fucking what? It has nothing to do with any of the shit that we've been talking about at all. Do you have any actual questions for me?
Thanks for having me on.